Hello guys and welcome back. So I have gathered all the elements here in a simple scene, and the first thing I have is the fluid mesh, and this is the water mesh. Set this to smooth shaded and let's hide these guys. Okay, so the first thing we need is this. Okay, then we need the environment, which is this guy. So this is our environment, and it's quite high res, so I'm not displaying it here. It's only getting displayed at render time. Okay, but I have a low res version of the environment that I'm going to be using for testing, for quick rendering, because this mesh is quite heavy and it takes a lot of time for it to translate it to Mantra and load it. So for the sake of speed, I'm going to use this low res version for the iteration here, and then once we are happy with the result, I'm going to swap this low res with a high res mesh. Now what is happening here? As you can see, if I look through this, it's actually not displaying any geometry, and I'm going to try and load one of these guys. Let me change this to all geometry. It's quite heavy, so it's going to take a little bit of time, and this is just one element from all of them. So these are the rocks, and if you look here, if we middle click, these are packed fragments because these are copies. They don't have to be copies, but in this case they are. So what's happening is I'm doing this. Let's say we have a grid and we have the toy, for example, and then I do copy to points. I want to copy this toy into those points. And so we have multiple copies, and if we middle click, you see we have 1.285. Now if we turn on pack instance, it's going to convert that into a packed geo. We can write this to disk as it is. Pack prims. Okay. And then when it comes to rendering, the latest Houdini version 16.5, I believe, or 16.0, has a new feature. So I'm reading in the packed primitives. Okay, it has a feature where it delays the loading of these primitives to render time. It only reads them when it starts rendering them, or the render needs them. And the way to tell Houdini to do that is by setting this load here to pack disk primitives. As you can see, it's going to display just a bounding box containing everything, but it's not going to read anything. If we click here, it's not going to show us anything. But when we hit render, Mantra is going to see this and start reading the actual geometry. And this is very efficient, because what's going to happen is we're going to save from exporting this data from Houdini into Mantra, and that's going to save us a lot of time. So this is what I've done with all these elements. They are written to disk as packed geometry, and then in the read node, I'm setting them to packed disk primitives. And this is my geometry. It looks like boxes right now, but when we go to Mantra and hit render, it's going to load in the high res mesh. Now this still is still slow. And for the sake of speed, I have this low res version, which is just a raw mesh that I'm going to be using. Okay, cool. So let's hide these guys. We talked about the fluid. We don't need that yet. So for the statue, it's the actual geometry that we've animated last week, and it's moving. So that's as simple as that. I have this display here, and I control click, which means display this for the viewport, and then use this switch for rendering. So it's gonna Mantra is gonna toggle this for when it starts rendering, and it's gonna display the geometry. Cool. So we have the statue, we have a low res environment, and we have the fluid mesh. Now let's create a simple shader. I'm going to use the principal shader. Actually, let's use the classic shader. I want something even simpler. So I just need a diffuse basically, and let's go back. I'm going to assign it to all these guys. Sometimes when you click and browse here, it doesn't assign them. It doesn't assign the shader to all of them. So just make sure. Sometimes I copy the path from the one that works and then select them again, paste it, and hit enter just to make sure that it got applied. Now for the lighting, I have a very simple lighting, and let's let me show you the HDR that I'm using. This HDR I downloaded from HDRI Haven. So this is the HDRI image that I'm using, and it's this 2.4, and I have this multiplier to add a little bit of a blue tint to it, and I have a sun pointing this way, and I have a camera. So the sun direction is this. Actually, we can see this in the viewport. Yeah. And I'm not going to use these. We'll go over them later. So let's go to Mantra, to the out context, and let's do a quick render and set these things up. So first of all, we need the camera. I'm going to override the resolution, make sure it's low res. I'm going to change this to physically based rendering. For the objects, I want my low res inf. I want the fluid mesh and the statue. And for the lights, I'm going to use the HDRI and sun. Let's hit render. And let me show, while this is going, let me show one thing. The water mesh itself looks like this. So if we check the mesh, you can see that it has a geometry underneath, so it's a volume basically. If we go inside, you see this is the water mesh itself. We're not removing this part, okay? And you see this is the collision of the statue coming up. And what we need to do to render this mesh properly. Now say we have this set to refractive, okay? The ray is gonna hit this point, say. It's going to reflect and do its thing, and then if it's refractive, it's going to travel through. Now what's going to happen is the ray is going to hit the surface. This surface is facing away, okay? It's the normal of the surface is pointing in a different direction than this. And we don't want to shade this. We don't want to see it because we're only interested in this top part of the scene. And to render this, for this to look correctly in the render, we have to tell Mantra to ignore any face that is pointing away from the camera, where the normal is not visible. So all these guys, the normal is facing the camera. Then we have these guys that are facing away. Their normal is in a different direction, opposite to the camera. And the way to do that is by going under the select the geometry, we'll go under the geometry tab, tick on back face removal, and this is going to tell Mantra to remove any face that is not directly visible to the camera, as if this is what we need to render this as a refractive material correctly. Okay, now this is what we have. This is what we have so far. The low-res environment, the mesh is working correctly. The statue, I haven't turned on the foam yet because we still going to post-process that and do a few things for it to look better. So we'll tackle that once we have everything set up correctly. So for now, I'm going to start working on this, on the water, and we're going to turn off. We're going to set all these guys to matte, and we're going to learn how to shade the water. Thank you guys for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.